Joining me now to discuss is Caleb Maupin, a journalist, political analyst, and author. Caleb, it's great to have you on the show today.
Sure. Glad to be here.
So you just got back from a trip to Moscow to participate in the International Council of the World Youth Festival. Can you start out by telling me what that's about and how you got involved?
Sure. Well, after the Second World War in the Soviet Union, they formed something called the World Democratic Youth Federation. And it was an organization that was designed to bring together young people that were opposed to fascism, opposed to war, and wanted to prolong the alliance between the Western countries and the Soviet Union and China and other countries that had defeated the Nazis. And they formed this World Democratic Youth Federation. And then every 4 years, they had an event called the World Festival of Youth and Students. And these were huge events that included people from all over the world. And two of them were held in the Soviet Union. And they were very memorable events in the lives of the people of Russia. They would go to these festivals around the world, or when they were hosted twice in the Soviet Union, they were very, very important because it was an opportunity for them to see people from the outside world. It was an opportunity for people of different cultures and different backgrounds to come together, etc. And so after the fall of the Soviet Union, for a while, they didn't have these festivals. Then in 1997, Cuba decided that they would have a World Youth Festival, and they started doing them once again in 1997. And now, the last one that they did was in Sochi, Russia in 2017. And Putin and the Russian government decided to expand it a little bit more. Generally, since the fall of the Soviet Union, it had been generally just kind of communist groups that had participated in these festivals. But in 2017, Putin decided to use the facilities that had been created for the Olympics in Sochi, Russia, to have like a really big, all-inclusive festival that was really about promoting international cooperation, economic development, aviation, railway, nuclear power, and it was about much more than simply the the kind of anti-fascist or democratic ideals that had kind of defined the festivals when they started. And I was there in 2017 at the Sochi festival, and it was really an experience. I went to the festival in 2013 in Quito, Ecuador, and then I went to the one in 2017 in Sochi, and it was like night and day. I mean, the one in Sochi was like going to the Olympics. I mean, it was like a really elaborate opening ceremony with high-tech sets and thousands and thousands of young people. And so it's now been announced that in March, the Russian government is going to convene another World Youth Festival. And this will be their own brand. This won't be the World Festival of Youth and Students. This will be kind of their own new brand that they're starting called the World Youth Festival. But it's from the tradition of the World Festival of Youth and Students. And there will be 20,000 youth from Russia who will be able to attend. And it's competitive to get in. It's the highest achievers in mathematics, the highest achievers in science, the top athletes in the country, the top musicians. It'll be very competitive. And 20,000 Russian young people who have the highest achievements and scores in the country will get to attend. And in addition to that, there will be 20,000 international guests from countries around the world. And I'm proud to say that my organization, the Center for Political Innovation, along with the American Student Union and the Party of Communists, we will be the American delegation. There will be 15 Americans that will be attending, and I am the chair of the American delegation to the World Youth Festival. It's happening in Sochi, Russia this March. And I got to tell you, the International Council that I was just at, the planning meeting essentially, was very amazing. There were 80 different countries at the planning meeting. And it was just absolutely beautiful. And I am so excited for the thousands and thousands of young people from around the world, 20,000 total, that'll be coming to join the 20,000 high achieving Russian youth for a week of activities, March 1st through March 7th, this coming spring. So it's going to be quite an international gathering, and I'm really honored to be able to participate and honored to lead a small group of Americans. And even though we'll be a small group, a lot of countries are sending hundreds of people. We're only sending 15. I think our American delegation and our participation is going to be really, really important because at this point, relations between Russia and the United States are not good. And we'll be there as peace ambassadors. We'll be there to make clear that not all Americans hate Russians. We'll be there to show a different side of America than what is shown, on international television and international media. And just what I experienced at the planning meeting, this weekend was, it showed me how important the role is going to be. When I sat down with leaders of different African countries, people from Mongolia, people from Vietnam and North Korea and Iran and other countries like that, it's really, really important that there be an American delegation. So I'm really, really proud to take on this responsibility.
Yeah, that's really cool and really interesting too, because I think, especially as you were noting in today's political climate, the United States establishment has kind of done everything that it can to cut off ties with Russia and to isolate Russia. And then you've got Russia here, you know, saying, hey, we're going to bring this festival back. We're going to welcome all these people, and we're going to welcome a delegation from the United States, and it may not be, what you would think of in terms of the establishment, but it is individuals like yourself who have noted, hey, Americans don't hate Russia. You're wanting to continue to build that bridge with Russia. What do you think is the significance of still having that delegation from the US, even with all of our government's policies here?
Well, it shows that Russia wants to get along with the United States. They don't want to have a confrontation. They don't want, a zero-sum game in international politics where it's, America gains at Russia's expense or Russia gains at America's expense. They would prefer that America embrace the new economy that's emerging around the world, the BRICS, the Belt and Road Initiative, the Eurasian Economic Union. This is a new economy that is emerging that is based on economic growth. And they would prefer the United States be on board with it rather than fighting against it. And I think that by including an American delegation and, as somebody who's representing a small delegation, I must say that they really rolled out the red carpet for me. I spoke at multiple press conferences. I was featured pretty prominently in the program. And, they think that the American delegation is going to be very, very important. Regardless of the fact that it won't be huge. And so that I think Russia is making a pretty clear statement that that we don't hate the American people. We may not like the policies of the American government, but we don't hate the American people. I must say that, these festivals are really life-changing experiences for the young people who participate in them. I went to the first one I ever went to, and it was in Quito, Ecuador in 2013. It was held in it's called Bicentennial Park, which is a park in downtown Quito, Ecuador. And so, we got there, and we arrived for the festival. And if you were arriving for the festival, they took you to a special part of the airport where they had buses then to take you over to the festival. And so I remember, I will never forget the experience when I was in my 20s. It was 2013, and I'm there, and we're wearing T-shirts, and we're arriving for the festival, and there's young people from Greece, and there's young people from Albania, and there's young people from from Zimbabwe and Syria and Azerbaijan and Sri Lanka, and just from all over the world are just gathering in this section of the airport where we're supposed to gather, where eventually we're going to be taken to the festival, as different parts of the country, different parts of the world are being represented, and we're all just kind of gathering and talking to each other and and trading newspapers and buttons. And then a whisper went up from the crowd that the plane from North Korea had just landed. And the airport got very nervous and silent. This plane from North Korea had just landed. And then all of a sudden the doors flew open and they marched in like military formation. And the men were wearing suits and the women were wearing traditional Korean gowns. And they marched in like military formation into the airport. And the whole airport was like dead silent. As they marched in, this plane from North Korea had arrived and they marched in. And the whole airport was like dead silent. All the hundreds of people there were like dead silent watching the North Koreans. And then somebody started applauding. And then somebody else started applauding. And pretty soon this whole airport was just cheering and applauding for the fact that North Korean youth could join with youth from all over the world. And this whole airport was just standing and applauding and cheering for the North Koreans. And it was an amazingly emotional experience to be in that room. I can't describe it. I think about all the Koreans that have been killed by the American government in the Korean War and the sanctions that destroyed their economy in the 1990s, and to be in that room with thousands and thousands of people cheering and supporting the North Koreans and embracing the North Koreans in that moment, I knew I was in the right place. That was really a life-changing experience for me. And I know that these festivals tend to be a really, really big moment in the lives of young people. And so I'm really, really honored to be able to participate in them. And for a lot of the young people who go to these festivals, it is one of their really only opportunities. It's like often the first time they've traveled around the world. There's young people from African countries that are in communist organizations that, this is their first opportunity to travel somewhere. This is their first opportunity to meet people from the other side of the world. The festivals have an athletic component to them. A lot of times, in the morning, everyone will get up and do exercises together. They have like martial arts training in some places. It's really something special. It's really something unique. And I really wish more people could experience it. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah, that's really cool and awesome to think for, being young and getting to go to something like that where you're not only learning a lot, but you're also meeting all of these different people from different countries. I mean, that has got to be a really cool experience. And you're learning, like you noted, that these people are not bad, because I think, especially from an American mindset, we're kind of taught to think that, Russia's bad, North Korea's bad, Iran is bad. But when you actually meet people from those countries, then you are able to break down that wall and to realize, oh wait, we're all humans. They're people just like we're people. And you're able to kind of get over that prejudice that is just instilled in the mindset here. And you're also able to kind of question why we have that prejudice in the first place. Why is that mindset and that other people are inherently bad? Now, when it comes to the timing of this, you mentioned that last festival in 2017. What do you make of the fact that Russia is bringing this back now for 2024?
Well, I think that the 2017 festival was so important, and it ended up being a really big national event in Russia. And it, on some level, there was an element of nostalgia to it because a lot of the Russians remember the Soviet World Youth Festivals. But then on top of that, at the same time, it was a way of Russia showing that it's not isolated in the world, because that's the narrative that we're getting, is that Russia is isolated. And I got to tell you, just at this planning meeting I was at, Russia is not isolated. So many different countries were represented at this festival. Young people there. Russia has very, very deep roots and connections in many corners of the world, and they are not isolated by any means. And that was made very, very clear. Every I would turn around, every person I would meet was from a different corner of the planet, and that is very important as well. And I think that at this time, right? It's also important to note that, the global communist movement has largely become divided. Many of the communist parties in the world, in the Western world, I should say, are not sympathetic to Russia in the conflict in Ukraine. Whereas, all the communist governments of the world are. Vietnam, North Korea, Laos, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, they all support Russia in the conflict. However, a lot of the Western communist groups don't. And that largely, I think the reason that they're doing this festival, and it's technically not a World Festival of Youth and Students, is like a rebrand, right? This is the World Youth Festival that Russia is doing, is because there's a need for some change. The Soviet Union is gone. The Soviet Union is not coming back. And, I think that, most of the participants of the festival would say they believe in socialism. They would say that they believe in economic development. They are opposed to Western imperialism, but they're not framing things in the same way that the Soviet leaders did. The Soviet Union's not coming back, and the kind of Soviet style way of doing things is not ever going to return, and that they're thinking about things more in a modern context. And I will say that, religious participation is certainly increased. Obviously when these festivals started, they were run by, Soviet aligned communists, very atheistic, very secular. But, there was a huge effort in Sochi in 2017 that I observed to accommodate Muslims and to facilitate Muslim participation. And I was talking with some of the guides at the weekend international council that I was at, and one of them is a Russian Orthodox blogger, and she runs a YouTube channel for Russian youth to teach them about the Russian Orthodox tradition and the Russian Orthodox faith. And that there's been a real effort to facilitate Christian faith and religious faith as part of the festival tradition as well. So I think that this is kind of Russia taking something from their communist past and updating it and kind of tweaking it and rebranding it for our time, and kind of taking what was good about the World Youth Festivals that the Soviet Union did, and then kind of changing them to be something that can fit into the modern political context better. I think that's kind of a way you could look at it. If I could answer your question that way. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes, I think that that does, and I think that that's a good point to look at, how it was held decades ago versus what they're doing now and what they're updating, and even just the ability to take the good elements of before and then to then pair it with learning and growing and where we are today in 2023, I think is really cool to highlight. Now, I did want to ask you, because I know traveling back and forth to Moscow right now is definitely a hassle, more so than it was in 2017 when it comes to all of the restrictions that are on right now. And it's also kind of an interesting time because the US government, or more specifically the Biden administration, is kind of shifting how it is looking at, or at least what its priorities are. Even though it still wants to support Ukraine, it's also got Israel on its plate and is trying to ramp up support for that. So, how do you see this situation where the US government is right now as it relates to Russia and kind of this ongoing view on Russia? Do you think that that's changed at all in the last year and a half compared to where we are right now?
Well, I think at this point, there was growing anti-war sentiment from the Republican side that we saw, and then the Gaza conflict has really just kind of thrown that for a loop. The other thing that I thought was quite interesting was that, I've been at international gatherings like this that were put on by the Russian Foreign Ministry before. There tend to be Israeli guests there, and it often tends to get awkward because you have Israeli guests and then you have guests from Arab countries, and they'll get into arguments and stuff. This time there was no Israeli guest, and
Oh.
there was also almost every speaker was getting up and condemning Israel and Israel's activities. I mean, while Russia, I guess, does diplomatically recognize Israel and they feel Israel has a right to exist, we've heard the recent statements from the Russian leadership where they basically are just calling out and condemning what Israel is doing in Gaza right now. And it seems that Russia is pretty solidly positioning itself in the anti-Israel camp. Now that they still have relations with Israel, and they have not denounced Israel's existence as a country. But that's kind of what I got from listening to the speeches that I saw in Russia, and also listening to what's being said by the Russian leadership. And that is certainly a shift. At the festival that happened in 2017, there was a lot of controversy because there was an Israeli delegation that participated, and among the flags that were in front of the in front of the festival in 2017 was an Israeli flag. And so the Iranians and people from the Arab countries were protesting out in front of the festival because they were angry about this Israeli flag being there. And then I believe it was an Iranian student climbed up the flagpole and pulled the Israeli flag down in
Wow.
2017 and was actually arrested by the Russian police because you can't do that. And that was disrespecting one of their delegations, right? They did have an Israeli delegation.
Mhm.
So that was like a big point of controversy in 2017. The way it looks to me, I don't think there will be any Israeli participation in the upcoming festival. And the tone of the speeches and everything that I heard, it seems like Russia is pretty solidly opposing and calling out Israel right now. But so is the whole world. I mean, right now, if you listen to the UN Security Council meetings, it's very, very clear that the United States that continues to veto resolutions supporting or resolutions that would call for a ceasefire, the USA is standing alone in doing that. And that Israel and the United States are kind of isolating themselves right now. There is just moral opposition to what is happening in Gaza pretty overwhelmingly.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think it's been interesting to kind of watch from Russia's response, because immediately after that initial attack that was carried out by Hamas on October 7th, you had, the US gets up, it says that it stands with Israel, it condemns the attack. But then you have countries like Russia and China that are the first to say, yes, we condemn that attack, but also we're calling for a ceasefire. We're calling for a Palestinian state to be recognized. You've got countries like Russia and China actually saying we need to talk about solutions beyond just the current problem and the current crisis, or else this is going to keep happening again and again, as it has been happening again and again. Looking at, as you noted, the US continuing to veto any resolution calling for literally a humanitarian ceasefire. It's not condemning Israel, it's just saying, hey, you've got, 2.3 million people on the ground that are in desperate need of aid, or else they're likely to die. What is the message that the US is sending versus the message that countries like Russia and China and the others that are calling for a humanitarian ceasefire are sending to the world right now?
I mean, it seems pretty clear that the United States is sending a message that Israel can do no wrong. They'll be with Israel no matter what. That's the message the United States is sending. Whereas, as you pretty articulately stated there, the message that Russia and China and many countries around the world are sending right now is that obviously they oppose terrorism and they oppose the actions that were taken by Hamas on October 7th. But this response from Israel that includes bombing hospitals, that includes, just horrendous bombardment that is happening against Gaza right now, is not justified. And that, if anything, the situation proves the need for the issue of Palestinian statehood to be addressed and the Palestinian question to be resolved. And this kind of the way it has been for so long, where the Palestinians just kind of live in this open air prison under occupation, that situation is going to continue to breed violence, and that there needs a resolution. And that's kind of what I've been hearing from the various countries around the world. Now, obviously, there are some countries around the world that are just adamant that they feel Israel has no right to exist, period. Right. And that's the Iranian position. That is the position of Hezbollah and many of the Arab countries, et cetera. But I think the bulk of the world is taking the position that there needs to be a humanitarian ceasefire, that Israel needs to end its bombardment of Gaza, and that this shows that there is an urgent need to resolve the Palestinian question.
Yeah, definitely. There is that, when you see everything that we're seeing on the ground in Gaza right now, I know that that certainly creates a lot of concern for other countries around the world looking at this saying, hey, we need to not only stop the killing on the ground, but look for some sort of a resolution. Now, finally, and I appreciate your time today, when it comes to sort of this multipolar world that we've been talking about, and as we're moving into it, and in a lot of ways, US foreign policy has kind of been a driving factor of that, because the US has weaponized its power in so many ways against countries around the world that now many other countries are in a position where they're saying, we don't want to continue to live in this unipolar world order where the US calls all of the shots. How do you see this multipolar world developing, and how do you see festivals like the upcoming World Youth Festival contributing to that as we move forward?
There's really two economies in the world right now, and the dominant economy remains the Western economy centered around Wall Street and London, which is really an economy based on usury or speculation. Right. Every major religion, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, they forbid the lending of money at interest because that leads to the creation of a creditor class, people that become wealthy by having money. They have money and they get more money by having money. And pretty soon governments are in debt to them. And pretty soon they're in the overall control of society. And there's a feeling that that is a very dangerous thing. And that's what our Western economy is largely based on. It is a speculative bubble. It is financiers dominating and holding back economic development so that they can stay at the top of the pyramid. And right now they're engaging in dramatic degrowth policies. BlackRock in particular is trying to, urge countries to decrease their agricultural output, to deindustrialize, and they're basically trying to roll back the wheels of history in order to bring stability to the financial system. That's one economy. But around the world, you have Russia, you have China, you have, many countries around the world that are involved in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and there's many different formations that have sprung up, including the BRICS. And their economies tend to largely be based on physical economy, the construction of infrastructure primarily to then facilitate the growth of an overall industrial economy. They're making computers, they're making phones, they're making steel, they're expanding the use of their natural resources, oil and natural gas. They've got mining industries that are expanding, and they have an economy that is much more based on the actual output of goods and the actual expansion of the physical economy. And I think that is the difference. And that, these two economies are coming head to head. And that, yes, this new economy that emerged in the world is really the result of communism, right? It's really the result of what happened in the 20th century when you had the Bolshevik Revolution, which eventually gave birth to the Chinese Revolution. But these economies, I wouldn't say, they're not communist or socialist in the same way that we saw during the Cold War. It's a very, very different political setup. These countries tend to have a big market sector. They tend to have big private corporations that make a lot of money, and they tend to have wealthy people, et cetera. So it's not the Cold War style communism, but it is a new economy that came into existence as a result of that. And it is focused on economic development, and it really involves the state kind of overseeing and ensuring that economic growth continues. The financial sector is heavily regulated and controlled by the state in order to ensure, goals of development. And that is what we're seeing around the world. And these two economies are kind of coming head to head. And when it really gets down to it, I mean, there's no reason that America needs to throw in with Wall Street and London. At the end of the day, I think the United States would be much better off if we had booming industries again. If the Midwest and the South, had new factories opening up, had new roads being paved, had high-speed railway being constructed, that would be much better for America. And there's nothing about the United States that says we need to go down with Wall Street and London, and we need to sink along with them in their dying speculative financial system. I think that at the end of the day, most Americans would like our country to have a booming, expanding industrial economy, just like the countries around the world that are in this new economy that's emerging. And I hope that people in the United States can develop some common sense and realize that that's where the future of America lies. And so rather than making enemies out of Russia and China and Iran and Venezuela and Cuba and countries like that, we ought to do business with them, and we ought to find a way that their success can be our success, and that international trade, international politics isn't viewed as a zero-sum game where we have to win at the expense of someone else, or someone else has to win at our expense, where we can get wealthier while they get wealthier. We can have win-win cooperation.
Yeah, certainly the road rather to World War III is not taking us anywhere good. So the hope is always that cooler heads will prevail and that the world will be better for it. Caleb Maupin, journalist, political analyst, and author, thank you so much for your time and insight today.
Sure. Always a pleasure. And thank you.